in battle. He shamed them all publicly for doing nothing to stop the growing discord, and all but called them cowards for being frightened of a dark forest and some no-account brutes from across the river. The shaming worked, and the dissension in the ranks was quickly silenced. His army fully committed, Caesar closed the final miles between his legions and Ariovistus' massive German army. Upon arrival, Caesar built a fortified camp and was surprised to discover that suddenly the Germans were ready to talk. Ariovistus called for a meeting at a neutral site with numerous preconditions, not the least of which being that the two leaders could only be accompanied by cavalry, absolutely no infantry guards. In practice, this meant that Caesar would have with him none of his fellow countrymen, as his cavalry was exclusively made up of Gallic auxiliaries. But Caesar sidestepped this ploy by ordering members of his favorite legion, the 10th, to mount horses and accompany him. It was from this episode that the 10th, one of the most famous legions in Roman military history, earned the nickname that they would carry with them for the rest of their existence, the 10th Mounted Legion. The meeting with Ariovistus was as strange as it was unproductive. The German leader was agitated and belligerent, but refused to commit himself to battle, though he implied that if it did come to battle, that word had come from the Roman Senate that the German had their blessing to wipe Caesar and his legions off the face of the earth. Meanwhile, while the two leaders talked, the German cavalry hurled javelins and stones at the Roman guard. It was obvious that the Romans were being baited, but Caesar refused to bite. As he returned to camp, the one thing he could not figure out was why the Germans did not just attack. They outnumbered the Romans, were in better fighting shape, had better access to supplies, and a superior tactical position. It didn't make a lick of sense. Soon, though, spies in the German camp brought an explanation. The tribal priestesses, who determined through divination whether the gods favored battle or not, had been performing their rites day after day, but kept coming back with a negative answer. Ariovistus himself wanted nothing more than to attack, but he risked the wrath of his gods if he did. Caesar immediately acted on this crucial piece of intelligence and made ready for an immediate assault on the German camp. Once their blood was up, the Germans were sure to fight hard, but maybe their religious hesitation would cause them to flinch or withdraw at the outset. For the outnumbered legions, it was their best hope for total victory. The next day, Caesar launched his full-scale attack. Whether religious concerns played a role in the fighting is unknown, but the Germans certainly didn't act as if their gods didn't want them fighting. However, as with the Helvetii, a full day's hard battle, taking place first on open ground and then on the trampled bodies of the dead, finally began to break the Romans' way. One of the wings, led by Marcus Crassus' son Publius, began to drive the Romans back, finally snapping the enemy line. The Germans broke headline for the Rhine, abandoning imperial dreams in Gaul, and now hoping to simply make it home alive. The 15 miles back to the river was a running slaughter, with Caesar ordering that no prisoners be taken. Ariovistus, displaying great courage and honor, abandoned his wife and daughter to the Romans and escaped on a small raft back to Germania. He never crossed the Rhine again. In one summer, Caesar had destroyed 2 massive invading forces and was fast making a name for himself as one of the greatest generals in Roman history. Here he was, campaigning where no Roman legion had gone before, defeating the very barbarians who had haunted Roman nightmares from the days of the Great Sack of Rome 350 years earlier. Caesar, of course, took every opportunity to send home breathless reports from the front line about his extraordinary campaign, his own genius, and the courage of his men. And in the public imagination, Julius Caesar was fast growing into a larger-than-life figure, who would soon eclipse his jealous triumvirate colleagues, Pompey and Crassus. For about a nanosecond, native Gauls held Caesar in the same esteem his fellow Romans did. He had prevented first the marauding Helvetii, and then the fearsome Germans from ransacking their homeland. Think if Caesar had failed, why, they could have been made mere vassals of some invading foreign power. They celebrated Caesar, and then wished him a safe trip back to Roman territory. Thanks for all your help. Maybe we'll call you sometime. But Caesar wasn't going back to Rome, and his army wasn't going anywhere. He ordered the legions to build winter quarters and then settled in to await the spring. The Gauls quickly realized that Caesar and the Romans were here to stay. Next week, Caesar will use a The strategy of divide and conquer to slowly assert Roman dominance over all of Gaul. Along the way, he would become the first Roman general to cross the Rhine River and campaign in Germania, as well as the first Roman to lead an expedition to the mythical island of Britannia. Though the Gauls would eventually organize a resistance and very nearly expel the Romans from their country, Caesar would not be denied his prize, and in a few short years, what had forever been a wild land of fearsome barbarians would become just another province in the mighty Roman Empire. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome, Episode 41b, The Gallic Wars. Caesar's first year in Gaul had been a great success for both the Romans and the local tribes. Two invading hordes, first the Helvetii and then the Germans, had been repulsed by the legions. Caesar was making a name for himself as a superb commander, and the balance of power among the Gallic tribes had not been upset. So as the winter of 58 BC neared, everyone was happy. But Caesar was not in Gaul simply to act as a bodyguard for independent tribes. He was in Gaul to conquer Gaul. To this end, he did not withdraw back to his provinces on the Italian side of the Alps as the Gauls assumed he would. Instead, he ordered his troops to build winter camps and dig in. These wooden forts dotting the countryside were a visible symbol of Caesar's true intentions. Suddenly, not everyone was so happy. But Caesar was a savvy general, and nothing if not a master politician. He knew that the jig was up, that there was no use pretending Rome was not in Gaul to stay, at least not when he met with the leaders of the Gallic tribes in private. Some tribes swore instantly to resist Roman domination, but others were persuaded that conquest was inevitable, and the only question was who would enjoy what privileges in the new Roman order. Caesar played rivals against each other, promising to settle ancient scores for one side or the other in exchange for support, intelligence, or troops. What Caesar managed to achieve in the tent prevented the Gauls from ever truly uniting in the field. When the spring of 57 BC came around, the Roman occupation was immediately challenged in the north by a confederation of Belgic tribes. The territory of Belgae, as you could probably guess, covers roughly modern Belgium, and was then about as far as you could get from Roman civilization. The tribes in southern Gaul were long accustomed to dealing with the Romans, but Italian traders rarely made their way this far north. So it is no great surprise that this would become the epicenter of initial resistance. But Caesar had been able to convince at least one of the Belgic tribes that support for Rome was in their best interest. When this tribe came under attack for their foreign allegiance, Caesar was quick to intervene, hoping to prove that friendship with Rome was not just a one-way street. Those who helped Rome would in turn be helped by Rome. Also, it was a lovely excuse to conquer Belgium. That Caesar had a Belgic ally was the good news. That he only had one Belgic ally was the bad news. He marched the legions north to support his new ally and prevent the Belgae from coalescing into a single force. But he arrived too late and saw to his dismay that a huge army was gathered. Skirmishes broke out, and a brief, bloody battle was fought to prevent a portion of the Belgae from circling around behind the Romans. Caesar, outnumbered and deep in enemy territory, had to think fast. Doubtful that he would be able to win a fight in the open, Caesar called for a play that had proved so effective at the end of the Third Samnite War. He ordered squads to fan out across the countryside and sack every settlement they came across. With all their warriors massed in one place, the civilian Belgae were helpless, and soon the whole territory was in flames. With little internal cohesion except a hatred of the Romans to bind them, the Belgic army quickly evaporated as tribes returned home to protect their property. Caesar was now free to march from tribe to tribe and pick them off one by one. Sometimes the locals resisted and were destroyed, but more often than not, they saw the handwriting on the wall and surrendered. One tribe in particular, though, the Nervii, neither surrendered nor were pushovers in the field. At one point, they managed to catch the Romans by surprise as they built a camp, and in the confusion, nearly shattered the legions before Caesar could rally his troops and counterattack. But aside from this one near disaster, the conquest of the Belgae went off without a hitch, and Caesar entered the winter of 57 BC with nearly the whole of Gaul already under his thumb. Over that winter, with the Romans again building camps across the country, Caesar returned to Cisalpine Gaul to attend to his duties there. He was, after all, still the governor, and there was a backlog of high-importance action items that he had been neglecting. While on the Italian side of the Alps, Pompey and Crassus left Rome to join Caesar for a conference. The triumvirate was renewed, and it was agreed that Pompey and Crassus would again serve together as co-consuls for the year 55 BC. The three men also took the time to divvy up the Roman world between them. Caesar would have his proconsulship of Gaul extended for another 5 years, and upon completing their term in office, Pompey would be appointed proconsul of Hispania and allowed to govern in absentia, while Crassus would receive the governorship of Syria. This would be the last cooperative venture between the three triumvirs. Crassus would soon lay dead to the Parthians, and the familial bond between Caesar and Pompey would soon be shattered by the death of Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter and Pompey's beloved wife. With their agreement in hand, each of the triumvirs went about their business. For Crassus and Pompey, this meant laying the groundwork for their consular campaign, and for Caesar, this meant consolidating his hold over Gaul. But despite his glowing reports to the Senate that Gaul was completely pacified, the reality was not so neat and tidy. This time, trouble came from the Veneti, a maritime tribe from Brittany, who decided to take their shot at avoiding Roman domination. Admittedly, they were in a unique position, and had good reason to believe they could resist the Romans, but in the end, it was not enough, and they too fell under Caesar's sword. The Veneti's unique position was a mastery of the sea that the Romans could not match. Their forts were all built on narrow spits jutting out into the English Channel, nearly impossible to attack by land, and connected to endless supplies by sea. If Caesar hoped to put down this rebellion, he would have to build a navy. But as we've noted before, the Romans were never great sailors to begin with, even on the relatively calm waters of the Mediterranean. The choppy chaos of the English Channel would prove to be one of the most implacable foes Caesar would ever face, and on more than one occasion it threatened to end not just his campaign, but his life. After an entire summer of being given the runaround and losing ships that were no match for the sturdy oak constructions of the Veneti, Caesar finally hit upon the weakness of his enemies. The Veneti ships lacked oars, relying exclusively on sails for maneuverability. Near the end of the year, Caesar sent the whole of his navy, some 200 ships, to attack the main Veneti stronghold. The Veneti were unable to resist the opportunity to crush the Romans once and for all, and sailed out en masse to greet them. But the Romans were prepared, and eschewing their failed tactics of ramming and boarding, they instead used hooks to tear down the sail